Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark, and we're in 2 Timothy chapter 2. We're continuing our study in verse 16 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, we saw last lesson, the last part of the lesson it says here in verse 16, but shun profane and vain babblings, for they will increase unto more ungodliness. And we saw that the Greek word for shun, peristemi, means to turn yourself about, to do an about face, to turn away from something. And what is it that Paul wants Timothy to turn away from? In verse 15, he says, do your diligence to present yourself to God for approval. You don't have to be ashamed coming to God. And when you do it, you make sure you're rightly dividing the word of truth. You're cutting it straight, so it'll bless people's hearts and it'll build them up into a great, strong spiritual structure, honoring God. And now he says, but shun something. Turn yourself about from the opposite side. Now, so he says here, but shun profane and vain babblings. Now, the Greek word for profane is bebelos. And we saw this same Greek word back in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 7. So 1 Timothy 4 verse 7 says, but refuse profane and old wives' fables, and exercise yourself rather unto godliness. So he says here, refuse profane and old wives' fables. What this Greek word means is that it's something that is totally and completely unholy. Bebelos means something that has no holiness in it whatsoever, no sacredness in it. All right, it has no amount of sacredness or holiness in it. Not even a molecule of it. So this word for profane means unholy, unsacred speakings, words, all right? So he says, but shun profane and then vain babblings. Now, this Greek word for vain babblings is kenophonia. And kenos means empty, and phone means a sound. So we saw the same Greek word also back in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 20. He says here, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, but avoid profane and what? And vain babblings. Avoid profane and vain babblings, and the oppositions of science falsely so called. So, vain babblings. It means empty or hollow words, words which have no benefit or health in them. Empty discussions on useless topics. This Greek word can also refer to talking to unbelievers about the reality of hell or the lake of fire when they have no intention of repenting. Or you're talking about the virgin birth when they have already made up their minds on the subject. It's like you're talking to unsaved people about subjects that they've already made up their mind on. You're just speaking empty words. The conversation is nothing but empty, hollow words. We throw our pearls before swine when the swine have no intention of changing. God needs to prepare their heart. And I learned that a long time ago witnessing to someone or sharing the gospel with someone, if they've made their mind up on a subject, and there's no sense in beating your head against the wall and trying to convince them, no, this is true, right? No, hell really is real. Or, the virgin birth. Let me explain it to you. Let me go into, 16 points on the virgin birth, and I'll convince you that the virgin birth is true, right? It's just vain babbling, empty, hollow words. You're speaking to someone whose heart isn't prepared. God has to prepare their heart. God has to bring them to a point where they'll be able to receive the truth of the Word of God, where the soil of their heart is still hard, and it's not soft yet to receive the seed of the Word of God that you're going to speak to them. So this all is included in vain babblings. You're just speaking words that they're empty words, and they're being spoken on empty ears that have made up their mind. It's like talking to the wall. Their heart is hard, and they're not willing to receive. They just argue. Why are there so many wars in the world? If God is a God of love, I've heard that a bunch of times. God's a God of love. Why is there war? Why would he allow war? And people like that, I mean, you can explain, but I wouldn't go far, because they've made up their mind and they're not willing to receive. Even Christians can fight and argue over topics like tongues, or what's the right way to baptize. Is it immersion? Is it sprinkling? Is there something else? Or are there apostles for today? I saw a church that said, the apostle so-and-so is the leader of this church. Are there apostles today, right? Churches are divided. Listen, churches are divided because they can't agree on these subjects. This is why you got Methodists and Protestant, Methodists and Lutherans and all these different Baptists, American Baptists. You got tons of different Baptist church. You got Pentecostal churches and full gospel church. They've all got a different view on things, and they can't agree on certain things. So they split, and they make a church out of their beliefs of what the subject is, right? And so, even amongst Christians, there's arguing, and they can't agree, and it just gets down to empty, vain babblings. And Paul tells Timothy to turn his back, to do an about face, and to stay away from, and don't waste your time with unholy, empty words or empty conversations. We need to apply Christ's blood to our ears and be careful what we hear. In Exodus chapter 29, verse 20. Exodus 29:20. Apply, as the priest was supposed to have the blood sprinkled on their ears, it represents they were supposed to have sanctified ears, to be careful what they hear. So also, we need the blood of Christ on our ears so we can be careful what to hear. And also, blood of Christ on our lips so that we don't get caught up into conversations and arguings with people about subjects of the Bible or whatever, wasting our time, wasting their time. Why do we need to turn our backs on unholy, empty words or empty conversations? We need to be discerning too. As Christians, you need to discern. Is this conversation going to go anywhere? If I start talking to this person about this subject, what's the end result? Are they really going to listen? Or do I sense that they've already made up their mind? That they're not going to believe the truth. We need to be discerning whether you're going to continue speaking or whether you're just going to waste words for the next half hour talking to a person, and you walk away and they walk away and nothing's changed. It was a wasted half hour of your life. So why do we need to turn our backs on empty, unholy conversations? Because it says here in the last part, we saw last lesson, he says here in verse 16, for they, meaning the empty words, the unholy, unsacred words, will increase unto more ungodliness. And again, we saw last lesson that this Greek word for increase is prokopto. And we mentioned that this Greek word means to cut forward, to proceed, and to advance. And they are these people who are using unholy, unsacred words, empty words. They are on a straightforward path that leads farther away from God. The conversations, the words they use is not doing nothing more than leading them away from the truth, but it's in a straight line towards ungodliness. The result is more and more ever increasing ungodliness. They get more ungodly, and it continues on, and their life goes down, and the increase of their ungodliness continues. They get worse and worse. The more a Christian entertains unholy, empty conversations, the less they become more like Christ. And the less they reveal Christ in their life. The more you occupy your time with unholy, empty words, the less the less spiritual you're gonna be. It's gonna suck the spirituality right out of you. You're gonna be more like the world and less like God. So he says here, it will increase unto more ungodliness. The Greek word for ungodliness means that people will not respect or they will not reverence God through their lives if they continue themselves to unholy, empty words. If they continue in these unholy and empty words, they become less like Christ. God is not respected. It leads people farther and farther away from God. If you're a Christian and people around you you're working with or your family know you're a Christian and they see you arguing with people about things and it doesn't draw them closer to God. It leads people to more and more ungodliness. And it's just not good. It's just not good. So we're going to continue on in verse 17 next lesson. But until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.